All right, it is just after 7 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get rolling. I see a lot of folks on the webinar tonight, so everybody who's on, welcome, welcome. So I do see a lot of folks who are familiar to us who've been at our webinars before. Welcome back, and for those of you who are new, welcome. My name is John Mantilla. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Parco, and we do retirement plan for federal employees across the country and around the world, helping them plan their retirement no matter what stage of their career. Whether you're just starting, beginning your career, whether you're mid-career, wanting to make sure your benefits all make sense given the life stage, and then we're, of course, working with folks nearing the end of their career. We want to make sure that they're on the right track. A little bit about us at Parco webinars like this every single Wednesday night to cover topics that are relevant to employees, and we have been and presented a lot of places, a lot of fun, Pentagon, NASA, Postal Service, and featured in a lot of really cool publications. So there's a couple ground rules before we get going. This is the agenda for tonight. There is a chat window. If you do have questions, to ask those in the chat window itself. Window as well. I know that questions come in, so I encourage you all to do that. And tonight we're going to be talking about sick leave. One of the most unique benefits that you have as federal workers. So we'll first talk about what sick leave is. Then we'll talk about its value. So how it can be valuable for you as you go through your career or as you think about retirement. Then we'll talk about your sick leave magic numbers, and then we'll conclude and talk about the takeaways. Sound good? Cool. Let's talk about what leave is. Now, as federal employees, you guys are different because you have two different types of leave. You have annual, you have sick leave. So just to keep in mind, we say PAROs have employees, benefits that you have as government employees. And this is really ways. So most private sector folks only have PTO. They only have access to paid time off. And that's your annual leave. You guys have annual leave, but then you audio as it keeps breaking up. Please let me and I will try to fix the Wi-Fi. Actually, I want to turn my off just there we go. But then you also have sick leave. So sick leave is a unique benefit because you can use it for when you're sick, particularly things like your personal medical needs, your family care and bereavement leave, family care for health conditions, and then you can also use it for adoption related purposes. So some of the powerful things about sick leave is that first there's no accumulation limit. Some of you may know folks who are like this, but you can have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. We have clients that we've worked with who have over 4,000 hours of sick leave. And that's wonderful, right? It's never good to get sick. You don't want to get sick. So it's great that you're accumulating. And certain agencies, notably the post office, can advance your sick leave to you. And so when it comes to using sick leave, there's a couple different ways that you can use it. If you have a need for a personal medical need, this could be a knee replacement. It could be if you're not feeling good. It could be if you are really sick and need to take a lot of extended time off. Personal medical needs, there's no limit to how much sick leave you can use. If you need to use it for general family care and bereavement leave, you can use up to 13 work days per year. And if you need to use FMLA for a family member with like a serious health condition, we've seen situations where folks, have to take time off to take care of an aging parent. You can use up to 60 work days. And for federal employees, we had this question last week. It's within the calendar year. Within the calendar. So now that we've talked about the ways that you can use your sick leave, let's talk about its value. Because we get people ask us all the time. We say, hey, look, should I use my sick leave before I retire, or should I try to retire with as much sick leave as I can? Well, let's take a look at Darla. Easiest to think is Easiest way to think is by practical example. So she has 20 years of service. She makes $70,000 a year, and her high three is $68,000. That's what the government's going to use to calculate her pension. She has this 174 hours of sick leave. Now, if Darla retired with that 174 hours of sick leave, that would add 1 month of service to her time in service, which would increase her pension by 1 extra month's worth of pension, which in Darla's case adds about $4.72 per month, which isn't bad. However, if instead of retiring with that sick leave, she used that sick leave before she retired, she would get credit for using that leave, plus she would get paid for being off. And so, given her annual salary on a gross to gross basis, she'd get paid almost $6,000 to not be at work. Plus, she'd be accruing the time because she's on sick leave, right? That still counts as being a time in service. So that's why we always say it's more valuable to use your sick leave while you're working than to retire with it. Kind of full stop. Um, and so this is why we sometimes see folks that say, "Hey, look, I'm deferring all my medical needs until I get close to retirement." I had a client once in Maryland, and she basically took 7 months off before she retired. She got one knee replaced, recovered, then got the other knee replaced, recovered, and then retired. It was because of these dynamics. Now, when we say like the ideal amount of sick leave to retire with is zero. I mean, for everybody, if you can get that number to exactly zero, that's the best. However, every individual federal employee has a unique set of magic numbers above the number zero. And it all has to do with how OPM gives you credit for your sick leave upon retiring. Now, this section might get a little bit confusing or might feel a little bit convoluted. We're going to walk through it step by step, but it's important that you all know how OPM uses and processes your sick leave when it comes to retirement to help us determine what those magic numbers are for your individual situation. So we have to understand, we have to think about how OPM uses your sick leave in retirement, but it's also important to understand how OPM processes retirements. So first we need to know what's your date of hire. So what's your service computation date? What's your retirement date? And what's your sick leave balance? Those are the three values we need to know. And so the question is, how will my sick leave affect my pension? And how many hours should I use before I retire? So for federal employees, when they're retiring, people ask us all the time, hey, what's the best day to retire? And after we say, oh, yesterday, today, always those answers. The best day to retire for a federal employee is always at the end of the month. And the reason has to do with how OPM processes retirements. So let's take an example like Federal Frank. He was born on May 5th, 1990. He's planned to retire at the end of this year, 2026. And he currently has 350 sick leave hours, and he's trying to figure out what his sick leave magic numbers are. Well, remember, Frank was hired on the 5th. So every time the 4th of a month rolls around, that completes a month of service for Frank. But as a federal retiree and as a first employee, you want to retire at the end of the month because it reduces how long it takes OPM to calculate and to process your pension. So federal employees, first employees, always want to retire on the last day of the month. Well, Frank retires on the last day of the month. He doesn't get to the 4th, right? He doesn't complete a month. And so when you think about how they calculate your pension, given that Frank months always complete on the 4th, there's basically 26 days where Frank otherwise wouldn't get credit for. So if he's retiring on the 31st, if he's retiring on the end of the month, what we would ideally like it to look like is we'd like to make it look like he was hired on the 1st. So basically, we need to round off this first month of service for those first 1, 2, 3, 4 days before he hits the 5th. And the way we do that is sick leave. And now we're going to get into how OPM calculates this. So first, they're going to take your retirement date. So 26/12/31. And we're going to subtract out your service computation date, 1990, May, the fifth day of May. So that gives Frank 36 years, 6 months, and 26 days of service. Now since you get credit for every whole month of service, we're going to combine those. So he has 438 months of service and then 26 hanging days. We're going to use these 26 hanging days. This is what OPM does to determine your sick leave key. So we take the number 30, we subtract out 26, and that means 4 days. So that's our sick leave key for Frank is 4 days based on his retirement date and his date of hire. With this key value in mind, and in hand. We then refer to the OPM table to determine how many hours are needed to round off and equal those 4 days. So this is what the OPM table looks like. Now, if we zoom in over onto Frank's section, we might, if you were doing it, you might look and say, okay, if I look at 4, I look to the column immediately to the right of that, and it says, okay, I only need 23 hours to round off that first month of service. And you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. 23 would be fine. However, what you'll notice in this table is that it's jumpy, right? It goes from 0 to 6 to 12 to 17 to 23 to 29, so on. There's values that are missing here. And so question is, what if I retire with one of these values that are missing? One of these in-between values? Well, according to the OPM handbook, if you retire with a value that's not on here, they will round up to the nearest value. So what does this mean for you as a federal employee when you're strategizing? Well, for somebody like Frank, he doesn't need 23 hours. He just needs one more hour than the previous day. So he actually needs 18 hours because if he retires with 18 hours, they will round that up to 23, and that will round off his first month of service. So for Frank, his first magic number, aside from 0, is 18. After we've rounded off that first month of service, they'll effectively subtract out increments of 174 hours until you can't anymore. After that, that will determine what's our use or lose balance. Now we say approximately 174 because for some reason, between month 6 and 7, it's not 174 hours, it's 173. Riddle me this and how that works, but that's one of those detail things we always try to. Our platforms always tries to be as accurate as possible, and we want to communicate that to you all as well. So, how will this work for Frank? How will OPM use his leave? Well, Frank has 438 months of service and 350 hours of sick leave. We're going to use 18 of those hours to round off that first month of service, which will give him 439 hours. That leaves him with 332 hours. Next, from that 332, we're going to subtract out an increment of 174. That adds one more month of service. That 332 that he has now will become 158 after taking out the 174. We can't subtract out 174 from 158. So 158 is Frank's use or lose balance. When we convert that to the number of days he can use, I should say Frank, that's 19 days and 6 hours that Frank needs to use before he retires to get to that first magic number, his nearest magic number. And it's one of the things that our platform can actually calculate for each of you individually based on your retirement date, based on your date of hire, and based on your current sick leave balance. We can actually calculate your specific magic numbers for you. And you can scan that QR code or visit us at goparco.com to do so. So we've talked about sick leave in pretty big detail tonight, right? We've gone through, you know, how it works and all this stuff. So what are some important takeaways? So first, determine how much sick leave you have. Look on your leave and earnings statement, look on your pay stub, see how much that number is. Then find what your sick leave magic numbers are, right? Determine what those target things are to retire with. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to retire with hours that get lost, right? You want to give the government as few hours as possible away. And that's why it's so important to determine your magic numbers. Then make a plan to use your sick leave before you retire. For a lot of folks, I know it can be uncomfortable to think about. And different offices make it harder or easier to use your sick leave. I do know that. But that's a benefit that's meant to be there for you. So if you have a spouse that needs you to take care of, or that needs to be taken care of, or if you've got medical issues that you've put off for a while, that's what that benefit is for. And you get a heck of a lot more value out of using it while you're working than if you retire with it. Annual leave is a totally different story, and we'll do another webinar about that. But for sick leave, it is way more valuable for you to use it than to retire with it. And you can create your account on the Parco platform to determine what your magic numbers are and a whole lot more. So tonight's presentation was really, really deep into one specific benefit that you all have as federal employees. And I look forward to answering any questions that you have. I know we had a few folks ask, hey, like, what are my magic numbers or what are my numbers? Please, ask those questions. Hopefully you can all hear me nice and clearly. And as always, it's a pleasure to present to you all.